Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to everybody who is joining us today. I think there's still some additional folks who are joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Byers. I'm CEO of the Greater Des Moines Partnership. And we're here today to talk about smart justice reform. And we've got a really great lineup of speakers today with all the talk that's been going on and focused on racial equity issues, not only here in Central Iowa, but across the state, across the country, that this is a very timely topic, and especially what's been happening in our legislature this year and a lot of work that's been happening on this front. This is actually a topic that and a priority that was included in the Greater Des Moines Partnership's work platform going into this year and part of our legislative agenda this year with some of the things that have happened with the smart justice reform. So we really look forward to this conversation today. We've got a tremendous group of speakers, a number of folks who I've known here locally for a long time, but also some great friends nationally who have joined us today and made time for us. So really look forward to learning a lot from what's been happening, not only here in the state, but some great lessons learned from multiple other regions and states from across the country. So we have Betty Andrews who's with us. She is the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP State Conference. She is also heavily engaged with the focus of committee work at the state, is co-chair of that, and had some great successes at the legislature this year and continuing to work with the governor on an executive order. We have Roy Williams, a mentor of mine, who is the CEO of the OKC, Oklahoma City Chamber, former ACCE chair, just a tremendous leader for many years in our industry. We have Linda Ashworth, who is the VP and Chief Operating Officer of the Dayton Chamber in Ohio. We have Kate Shanks, who is the VP of Public Affairs with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. And David Velasquez, who is the Director of Education Business Coalitions and Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives and United LA with the foundation work that the ACC is doing. So some really great work. And then also we have one of Polk County Supervisors, Angela Conley, who will be talking about the Polk County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. So as you can see, we have a very packed lineup, a lot of great speakers and content to hear from. And I also want to just really highlight the fact that there has been a lot of great work that's been going on in our region and state on this front for a long time. I know that there's a number of those folks that are joining us as well today. So whether that's NAACP, which I mentioned before, but United Way, Evelyn Davis Center, Goodwill Industries, and so many others who have been working on this important work for many years. You may have also seen that Isaiah Knox with Urban Dreams and I co-authored an op-ed in the Des Moines Register on this topic a couple of weeks ago, and really highlighted some key statistics that really highlight the inequities in our system that really need to be addressed specifically regarding race. In the state of Iowa, Black Iowans make up only 4% of the population, but constitute 20% of the population in our jails and 24% in our prisons. And those numbers are just unconscionable. There's something systemically wrong with our system that we need to figure out, and we need to do better. And that's a big part of what we're talking about today as well too. Some other stats from ACCE, the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. Recidivism is a big issue as well too. Within 3 years of release, almost 2/3 of prisoners are former ex-prisoners are rearrested. So it shows we need to do a lot better job as a nation, as a state, as a region with reentry efforts as well. So again, it's really important. You know, some people might be asking why the Greater Des Moines Partnership is an economic development chamber of commerce is working on this issue, and why is that important? But this is an issue that business leaders and economic development leaders need to step up on, and that's one of the reasons why we've asked our colleagues from across the country to join us that have been big leaders with their organizations and the business communities who have really stepped up because of the unique opportunity, not only with that voice of business, but that ability to have cross-sector coalitions and work on issues, whether that's corrections, diversion and prevention, sentence and reform, justice reinvestment, education, and employment. So many different things are important. So many important things that are important for racial equity, so many things that are important in terms of government resources, so many things are important in terms of talent attraction and retention and upskilling. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Betty Andrews. And Betty, thank you for making time for us today. I know you're really busy today and all the great work you've been doing, but just want to commend you on your amazing leadership over the years and specifically over the last couple of weeks. Betty.
Thanks so much. I appreciate being able to be with you. Thank you, Jay, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank the partnership for making this opportunity available to talk about the stat that you've been leading with, that African Americans are, we say about 3.8% of Iowa's population, yet African Americans are about 26% of the incarcerated population, which is a huge number. And as a matter of fact, that's the stat that woke me up when about 10 years or so ago. And when I think about how at that time, Iowa was #1 in the nation for the disproportionate incarceration of African Americans, that was something that called me to action, and I could not sit back and let that continue to happen. So for me and my work, I was already very active in the NAACP, but it also spawned me to do additional work, including starting the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities and a number of other things. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. I'm going to ask you to back the slide up one and just acknowledge that the NAACP is an organization with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And we just celebrated 110 years in 2019 as the largest and oldest civil rights organization in our country. The NAACP continues to be focused on disparities in economics, healthcare, education, voter empowerment, and of course, the criminal justice system. We call these our game changers. And so today we're going to be focusing on criminal justice. And back it up, forward one. Thank you. So obviously the urgency of now. So you see here a picture of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Mr. Floyd, and then also Manuel Ellis. And I think that, we fully understand that there have been a lot of things in the work, but we certainly also understand that this moment where we're looking at George Floyd's death and others' death is something that is offering an additional boost. Can you back up again? Sorry. And I just also wanted to point out that not only does this happen to people in Minnesota, this happens to people in Iowa. The last picture there, Manuel Ellis is his name, and he is my nephew. Now he is from Tacoma, Washington, and had an incident in March where he was killed by the police, and there was a huge cover up. Now the videos are being shown, and the governor and the city council is beginning to take action. So this can happen to anyone. Next slide, please. And just to really emphasize that, so it's also the urgency of now, but it's also the urgency of something that has been going on for some time, and not just even with these individuals here. You see Trayvon Martin and a number of others. It's not just recent, but it's we're looking at this now because of the cell phones and video that has become available. So that's helping push things forward. So with that, next slide. With that, as I mentioned before, we have what we call game changers in the NAACP. These are areas of well-being that we focus on that help lift not only the African-American community, but if we lift the African-American community, we are generally lifting all communities. So next slide, I won't go through these again. And then I just wanted to key in that our game changer in criminal justice is public safety and criminal justice. So not only criminal justice, but it's also public safety. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the disparities in at large in the country when it comes to African American. So Blacks are 13% of our nation's population. We are 30% of those that are arrested. We are 41% of the people in jail. We are 49% of those in prison. Those numbers are quite scary. Next slide. And then in Iowa, 1 out of every 12 African Americans is currently in prison on parole or on probation. We're about 3.8% of the population and 26% of the prison population. We are also over 30% of felony convictions. And in 2007, the Sentencing Project issued a report showing that in the state of Iowa, Blacks were almost 14 times more likely to go to prison than our white counterparts. And, you know, I like to pause on that stat because it is 14 times. It is not 14% more. It is exponential. It is double, 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 and then some. And so, and the update to that came in 2016, where now we've made a little bit of movement. African Americans are 11 times that of whites to be involved in the criminal justice system. This is a huge disparity, and we are definitely in crisis. And this is what has been propelling the work of the Iowa, Nebraska, NAACP, and that of our 30+ branches. Next slide. Okay, and so in Iowa, here's an example. Blacks are arrested at a rate of 8.34 times higher than whites for marijuana possession. Blacks are also arrested at 7 times higher in overall drugs, and Blacks are more likely to have their vehicles searched. So not only are we being arrested, we are also likely to have our vehicles searched, which means that that contributes to the disproportionality. This in spite of the fact that African Americans and white Americans generally use drugs at the same rate. Next slide. Next slide. We are in crisis. That's the emphasis. We're going to go next slide. Okay, so some of the things the measures that we have started, we're working on successful reentry. We're working on making sure that banning the box is happening. Of course, banning the box in employment and in housing. And then we are certainly working on citizenship rights, which is inclusive of that people get their right to vote back. Next slide. I'm almost done here. Okay, and then the NAACP, this is our legislative agenda in short. We support eliminating racial profiling, increasing fair chance employment, ensuring the right to vote, sentencing reform, addressing the wealth gap, because this is more than just a criminal justice issue, and removing educational disparities. Next slide. And then the way we conduct our work is we work with our law enforcement and our judges and numerous community stakeholders. And of course, we are on Capitol Hill. Next slide. And next, we'll skip this one. Next slide. Next slide. We also produced the summit called the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities. That's at iowajusticesummit.org.
We may have lost Betty. She was joining us from Iowa City, so I think she was close to completing her presentation. But again, note the summit that the NAACP has led in the past, and my guess is they are planning one again for this year as well, and obviously probably depending on social distancing in terms of when and what that looks like, but would encourage all of us to participate in that. So let us move on to our next speaker, and I see Roy is still here, and As I mentioned before, Roy Williams is the president and CEO of the OKC Chamber. Has just done tremendous work on this front for a long time. He has presented on this topic to other Chamber of Commerce leaders like me multiple times, and is really seen as an expert. And have just they've put together just an amazing coalition and executed incredible results within their justice system. And so just one other stat too that I've heard in the last couple of weeks was that in our country, the United States has 5% of the total world population, but 25% of the prison population. Another sobering fact. And so there's definitely things that as a society we need and can do better. And I think OKC has a model that we can learn from. So Roy.
Thank you, Jay. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I know we have real limited time, so I'm going to be very quick. I assume you can hear me, right? So, flashback. 30 years ago, Oklahoma County opened a brand new jail. It was built with 1,250 maximum security cells, and the day it opened, it was full. 15 years later, it went from being full to more than double its capacity. And in fact, some of these single cells were holding 3 people. So the county, in their wisdom, felt that the solution to overcrowding of the jail was build a bigger jail. And the consultants they were working with said that if you continue to grow your population the way you are, you're going to need to build a jail that will have capacity of about 3,500 people. And that would cost $300 to $400 million a year. While that sounds expensive, the operation of it over a 20-year period would dwarf that number. So the county came to us, the chamber, because the chamber runs all of the city, county, school district bond issues, the initiatives, as well as other community initiatives. And so we were asked, would y'all help us try to pass a bond issue to build a new jail? Well, we polled the voters, and the voters 2-1 said, no way, we would not vote to do this. So that happened over the course of years. And polling just simply said you could not do that. Well, shortly thereafter, in comes the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice sees the overcrowding, all the other problems going along with that, and basically provide about 76 items to the county that says you need to fix these. And if you don't, the Department of Justice will take over your system. And I'm from Texas, and I was in a position in Texas where I saw when the Department of Justice took over the Texas Department of Corrections, what happened. So we knew we didn't want to do that. So years continue to pass. The county chips away at some of these issues, but the main issue was overcrowding and capacity, and that wasn't going to go away. So the county kept coming back to me and saying, that we need the chamber's help. And so I was lamenting this to my executive committee, and they agreed, we've got to do something about this. Obviously, the county is not interested in looking at criminal justice. It's just looking at housing inmates. And we need to look into this. So in 2015, our board voted that the chamber would get engaged. And what that meant was we were going to end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in engaging consultants to help us figure this out. So in 2015, we hired the Vera Institute of Justice out of New York. And that turned into 3 different contracts. The first contract was understanding who was in our jail, because our county did not know. Our sheriff ran the jail. They had no information on really who was in the jail. What we found out is of the 2,600 that were in there, 80% had never been convicted of a crime. 400 had mental health problems that were not being treated. 200 had drug and alcohol problems that were not being treated. So we knew we had a population there that was really strange. Second contract with the Vera Institute was develop a plan. Help us figure out, how do we deal with this? What can we do to reduce this population? And then the third was an implementation plan. And we actually hired the Institute out of New York to relocate an attorney on their staff to Oklahoma City for 9 months and begin implementing this particular plan. Some of the things we found was, and this is not unique to here, is that no one is in charge of the criminal justice system. No one is in charge of it on the county level. No one's in charge of it on the state level. And it is comprised of so many different players, and they do things that have unintentional consequences that impact other things. So when I say what's the criminal justice system, it is defined as from the time someone first encounters law enforcement to post-conviction. So it's everything in between that. Involves dozens and dozens of characters, police, sheriff, district attorneys, public defenders, judges, on and on and on. So why did we do it? Why did we decide we needed to do it? Because we saw it as impacting the business community in two ways. One, what we were into was totally not sustainable economically. We would never have enough money to continue doing what we're doing. So we had a model that was broken. Secondly, it was socially unsustainable. When people get incarcerated, they tend to lose a lot of things. Maybe their car, maybe their apartment, maybe their house, maybe their children. And so the social damage that was being done by incarceration was just unsustainable. So we said, you know, nobody else seems to care about this, so we, the business community, are going to take it on. So we, to give you the bottom line, we went from a population, daily population of 2,600 after we worked on this for 5 years. Our jail population now is less than 1,500. And if we can get the state to remove the prisoners that should be in the state, we will be at the original capacity of the jail that was built 30 years ago. We'll be under that 1,250. In addition, we are saving the county because the county has to foot the bill of the county jail. We're saving them about $20 million a year right now. Another thing we did was we got the county commissioners to establish a jail trust. So we took the administration and management of the jail away from the sheriff and put it into a trust. That trust has since hired an executive director, a professional manager, and effective July 1, in a couple weeks, that trust takes over the jail. So it becomes professionally managed and not managed by a politician. This has led us to get pretty involved in state criminal justice reform. We were the largest provider to the Oklahoma prison system because we're the largest city, so that just kind of makes sense. So the more we can reduce that, the more that it would benefit the state. We also found that state laws, to a great degree, impact your county jail population because they define what punishments are, you know, what felonies are, and all that kind of stuff. So we jumped in both feet into state criminal justice. I was appointed by the governor to lead a task force on fines and fees and look at the entire fines and fee structure of Oklahoma. I since served on 2 other criminal justice legislative initiatives at the state level. So we were one of the biggest advocates at the state for criminal justice reform on that as well. So we now formed an entity that is the institutional knowledge of all this. That was one of the things we learned was you can go in and make all kinds of changes and make legislative changes, but the minute the elected officials change or the hired people change or the people involved in the system change, you can revert back. So we created a new nonprofit called the Criminal Justice Advisory Council, CJAC. And we created a mechanism for funding it. That entity contracts with the chamber to staff this Criminal Justice Advisory Council. I have 2 people full-time on my staff that do nothing but work on this criminal justice. So I'll end by saying we have a website up. I encourage you to go see it. It explains a lot of what I just said. The website is OK County, COUNTY, CJAC, CJAC.com, and it has who sits on that council, as well as what the reforms are and what initiatives that we're taking. It's made a world of difference. The last thing I'll say is that we also put money up to this. Oklahoma City has a program called MAPS, Metropolitan Area Projects. It's a temporary 1 penny sales tax to do different things. We passed in December a $1 billion 8-year temporary sales tax program to fund a whole bunch of initiatives. But almost $250 million of it is going to criminal justice. We're going to spend $40 million on mental health and addiction treatment, $38 million on a family justice center operated by a local nonprofit. We're going to spend $87 million on transit that's focused in minority areas. We're going to spend $50 million on homelessness. We're going to spend $17 million on a diversion hub, and we're going to spend $25 million on a freedom center and a Clara Luper Civil Rights Center. So with that, I'll stop. Jay, I'm at the end of my time.
Roy, thanks so much. What a great success story. Thanks to you and your team for your leadership, and thanks for making time for us today. We really appreciate it, and lots of lessons learned that we can look at here as well. I think Betty was able to get back on, and so can we go back to her slides, and so we can let her finish up. Betty, are you with us? Okay, well, she was with us again, and sorry about that. If she comes back on, we will give that opportunity for her to complete her presentation. So sorry about the tech issues, everybody. Let's move on to Linda Ashworth. As I mentioned before, she is the VP and Chief Operating Officer of the Dayton Chamber. And she's going to be talking about what the Dayton Chamber has been doing on workforce and reentry efforts. So Linda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you everyone for being here. Just a kind of a little background. So the Dayton, Ohio is located in Montgomery County in Southwest Ohio. So a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about is the efforts that we're working on, particularly with our county of Montgomery County. Like Roy, this is not something that's new to both us and our community. And just as a little bit of background to share with all of you, back in 2010, our county was able to receive a grant to do research on the recidivism rate and the barriers that cause folks not to be successful when returning from incarceration. Based upon that, we formed what we call the Office of Ex-Offender Reentry and its supporting council. We are there is a reentry policy board, and I think that for us, that's one of the biggest items that I would stress and say in all of this area was important, is to get that collaborative efforts in place from multiple stakeholders throughout your community. So in 2010, when we established our program, the underlying goal was to reduce the recidivism rate in Montgomery County by 50%. I'm happy to say that those returning citizens that participate in some of our programming have a very, very low rate of recidivism, so that we are seeing that if you provide opportunity for housing, employment, and other supportive services, that you will see a great effort of returning citizens being productive within the community. It is very important to us because, again, as Roy talked about the cost of incarceration, to balance that, since that grant expired 2 years after, in 2012, the operations of the Office of Reentry for our county and the cost to provide those services has been a line item in the county budget since that date. And so it is something that has seen a lot of backing and support. And as a result of that, it makes all our work easier. I will say it is about having that strong coalition of people to make sure that your program is successful. The specific piece in which our chamber is involved, and myself specifically, is in the Subcommittee of Employment. Our council has 6 different subcommittees that work on different areas of reentry: housing, supportive services, legal issues. Specifically, a couple years ago, we created one committee just to look at women in reentry. We have turned one of our county's facilities completely into all female here in the last 5 years, which is an unfortunate turn, but we're focusing specifically on what the issues are for women who are coming out of the system and re-entering into the community. And then the last, not the last one, but the one I specifically deal with is employment. Because the linchpin key to all of this, we found, is if when a person is returning, if they have opportunity for employment, that will go a long way to reduce recidivism. Certainly the barriers that are in place for those folks are something we're all aware of, not only the things that Betty talked about earlier of ban the box, the myths that go along with hiring folks with criminal backgrounds and other things. And part of our work is to talk to the business community. We, through our local chapter of SHRM, through different venues like Rotary clubs and others, we go out and on the speaking circuit and talk about sort of the myth busting related to hiring people with criminal backgrounds. And that has been very helpful in getting companies to say, okay, that this may be something that I want to do. It was a lot easier last year prior to COVID because the unemployment rate was low, so companies were a little more interested in loosening some of their restrictions to get good employees, but the premises still work. So the 2 things that we have worked on specifically to help our returning citizens is we have created in 2015 a program called the Reentry Academy. It is a program that lasts 6 weeks. It's voluntary for folks returning to our community, where they will do soft skills training, mock interviews, sort of learn things about budgeting and how to balance their checkbooks and keep their money straight, all the things that a person needs to do to be a good employee when they start. We then take those graduates that come out of the academy and we built a relationship with a pipeline of employers that will interview and potentially hire those individuals. The academy, since its inception, we've had about 600 returning citizens go through our academy. Of that, and the ones that have gone through, we have had 96% of them have been able to pass the drug screen, which is one of the pieces that we put through. And of those, we've also had in 95% of them have maintained a life outside of the prison system since they went through the academy. So we really feel that it's a good foundation. Even when our folks graduate, our team that works at the academy do follow up to make sure, particularly if there's supportive services or other things that they need, we put that in place. So the academy has been a really great opportunity, and I believe through chat they've put up the website for Montgomery County where you can get the information on how the academy is structured and what the agenda is. So I encourage you to look at that. The second piece that we are just now starting to weigh into, as a matter of fact, we're getting ready to launch it here in the next few weeks, is a program we call REACH, which is a Reentry Entrepreneurship Assistant Cohort. And so another thing that we discovered is when folks are coming out of the system, sometimes those barriers to re-entry push them in the direction of maybe entrepreneurship. Maybe they can start their own business with the skills that they have without, since they are their own boss, someone who doesn't want to take a chance on them. So we have partnered with our folks at the Chamber. We have our Minority Business Partnership Program here at the Chamber who is spearheading it. We are putting together a program helping folks at a boot camp format understand what they need to do in order to be entrepreneurs. We were able to get support for that program, and it'll be a 6-week cohort and include one-on-one counseling after the boot camp. And the idea is to make sure that folks understand what it needs if they want to start a business, how to go about it, the basic skills, and at the end, they will do a pitch competition to our local cohort that works with our entrepreneurial system, and see if maybe they can get someone to fund them to start their own entrepreneurial business. So those are just a couple of ways from the Chamber perspective that we are plugging in to help with those returning citizens into our community. And we're looking particularly in making sure we are the advocate and going around and telling the story of the value of these individuals as potential employees to employers. Also, again, providing that soft skill training for those employees or those returning citizens to become employees, and now moving in to some skill development in the area of entrepreneurship. So those are kind of the ways that we've been supporting this effort through basically the last decade, and hope that it continues and grows. Jay, that's kind of the base items I wanted to discuss, and would be happy as we move forward to answer specific questions.
Linda, thank you so much, and congrats on the great work you've been doing in Dayton. And again, thanks for making time for us today. And we'll hopefully you can stick around for the Q&A as well too. All right, now we're going to, as we're going across the geography of the country here, let's go to Kentucky, and we have Kate Shanks, who is the VP of Public Affairs with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, an organization that's been doing a lot of great work statewide on this front. And we're going to be hearing about the Kentucky Chamber's work on sentencing reforms and some recent legislative win to support employers who are hiring ex-offenders. So Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you to everybody on the call. It's great to be a part of this discussion. You know, unfortunately, we've seen some pretty upsetting situations in Kentucky recently with the killing of Breonna Taylor, and we continue to see quite a bit of protesting. Unfortunately, some violence towards some of the protesters. We did see some policy at the local level dealing with no-knock warrants, which have been banned in Louisville. The city of Lexington's looking into that as well. Our legislature is not in session, and so I think a lot of this is going to carry over into what we can do at the state level. And we are talking about that, and we are engaged on that, because we do, unfortunately, thinking about the presentation that Betty just shared with us about the racial disparities in the corrections system, we do see that in Kentucky, where we have a situation where about 8% of the population it's Black Kentuckians, and yet they make up about 29%, almost 30% of the jail and prison population. And so we are very much aware of these challenges in Kentucky and the role that we play at the Kentucky Chamber, the business community, and being a part of the discussions on policy to deal with it. We are the largest business association in the state. We work statewide, and we work a lot in Frankfort, Kentucky, which is our capital, on advancing criminal justice reform policies. We are part of a very important coalition in Kentucky called Smart on Crime. I can't list all the members. There are several, but it is the ACLU, various religious organizations, criminal defense attorneys, DPA, Department of Public Advocacy is part of it. And then recently, a couple of different victims groups have joined our coalition. And so we are quite a diverse group, quite a diverse voice on criminal justice reform in Kentucky. And I think we've been very successful. We first got involved in these issues a few years ago with a bill that we passed back in 2016. And really, we started talking about corrections issues in terms of the impact that they had on our budget, on our state budget, and where we saw incarceration rates trending in the wrong direction, increasing, and the cost to our state, around $22,000 a year to incarcerate someone, as just being simply unsustainable. You can get an associate's degree from our community college for less money than the cost to incarcerate someone. But really, I think what got us more engaged on the issue of reforms is when we started discovering the workforce challenges that we faced because of the problem. We did a workforce participation report back in 2017. It's a little old now, but Kentucky traditionally has a pretty low workforce participation rate. We're usually down in the 40s in terms of how we compare to other states. And we looked at things like demographics and what you would expect to see, disability claims in Kentucky, but then we also looked at incarceration rates and drug and alcohol abuse and how that was affecting our workforce participation rate. It's a top issue for the business community. It's getting workers, getting workforce. And we started recognizing that we had a role to play in some of these discussions in helping get people into recovery, into a effectively working reentry system and back to work. And so we've had quite a bit of success. We aren't finished. We have a lot of work to do, but we've had some good success. In 2016, we passed a felony expungement bill. This was a bipartisan bill. We were dealing with a bipartisan legislature, Democrat-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, and a Republican governor at the time. We teamed up, and it was the first year that the chamber had come out and endorsed an expungement bill. And we recognized that felony conviction on someone's record was a deterrent to finding good work. And that we knew we had research that after so many years had passed, an individual who had been convicted of a felony was just as likely to reoffend as someone who hadn't ever been convicted. And so we were out there talking about that research and talking about the impediments to employment that the conviction held. And we were essentially able to pass a felony expungement bill that was a pretty important, powerful piece of legislation in Kentucky. Since then, we've passed an update to that bill. And in this past session, we passed one where there was an automatic expungement of acquittals and dismissals as well. So that was really, I think, probably the first bill that we worked on that was pretty prominent on this issue. We also looked at some licensing reform legislation. There was an automatic prohibition against professional licensing if you had a felony. We felt that there should not be an automatic prohibition and that the licensing board should look at that more closely and make those decisions, make that call on their own. And so we wiped that off the books as well. Some of the other bills that we've been working on that I think are important to point out, we've dealt with probation credits and looking at how we can add education and work experience to probation credits and helping those who are on probation and getting through that particular part of their sentence. There's still some work that we need to do. And I want to talk a little bit about our jail system in Kentucky. We do have a state prison system. We have about 9 state prisons. And then we have a county jail system that's pretty expansive, around over 70 county jails across Kentucky. We have about 120 counties in Kentucky where we've got quite a few different local governments that we work with. And the county jails, as I think might be in Oklahoma, as we heard, house some of the state inmate population. They house the Class D felon population, and they are paid per diem to house those individuals. And so we found that when we start to look at felonies, which is where we really kind of hone in a lot of our focus because of how detrimental it can be to have that conviction, and we start to look at policy that addresses the number of people convicted with felonies, we get a lot of discussion on how we can maintain the financial stability of the county jail system. So it's a real challenge to get through it. Yeah, we nearly passed a felony theft threshold bill. We have a really low theft threshold. It's $500 in Kentucky. And we looked at passing a bill that would have raised it to $1,000. And then there was a trigger if you had multiple up to $1,000 convictions over a certain period that would trigger a felony. But a single theft of $500 would get you there now. And we had a bill that would change it to $1,000. We passed it out of the House, passed it out of the Senate committee, and it stalled on the Senate floor, unfortunately. Of course, it was one of those bills that came up during the COVID outbreak when our legislature was greatly reduced in their capacity to do work. But nevertheless, it made it nearly to the finish line, and we unfortunately were unable to pass that, and that would have reduced the population of folks with a felony conviction. Another big one that we work on is felony defelonizing possession. So of course, for certain drugs such as marijuana in certain quantities, it's a misdemeanor, but for a lot of the Schedule 1, 2, 3 drugs, you're looking at a felony for possession, even if it's a single case. And so we've looked at creating a gross misdemeanor, creating a system where then you would be dealt with at the county jail level. But again, there is the dollar associated with that and with the housing of state inmates. So that one has been very difficult for us to really move the needle on and going forward. And I think we'll continue to push that one. In Kentucky, we unfortunately have quite addiction epidemic that we're dealing with. It's very troublesome. It was, we used to talk about it really in the framework of opioids, but it's really broader than that. Meth has been a real problem, of course, heroin. And so we have a lot of people, I think it's about 20% of the state prison population is in there for a drug offense. And then when you really think about it, it's probably more than that, because there's probably a lot of offenses related to property crime that are fueled by addiction. So it is a pretty big player. The role of addiction in our criminal justice, it's a pretty big player. And we're really trying to take a better look at how we handle addiction. And can we handle it separately from the correction system? And when you think about $22,000 a day, what would that mean in terms of treatment and how we can take care of people? And so for sure, when we talk about reforms and we talk about policies, we absolutely are going to be talking about addiction and how that plays in. And you mentioned too the bill that we passed, and I just want to mention this quickly because I think this is a model bill that other states could pick up. It came from Indiana. We worked with Greater Louisville Inc. and Commerce Lexington, 2 local chambers to pass it, and it is our Recovery Through Employment bill. It creates a framework. It will create a framework and regulation for second chance employers. And what it will do is it will lay out what it means to be a second chance employer, what role employers will have in an employee's recovery process. And then it creates some legal liability protections against negligent hiring, supervision, and retention. And so it's a really powerful bill. We passed near unanimously, and it's not easy for us to pass legal liability type bills in Kentucky. But I think it's important because it's basically saying, the General Assembly of Kentucky is saying, and it was signed by our governor, that hiring someone who is in recovery or retaining someone who is struggling with addiction and helping them is not considered negligent. And that as long as you're doing certain things to ensure that they are on the path to recovery and that they haven't relapsed to where they can hurt someone, that it is not considered negligent. And so it's a really important piece of legislation, and I think it's something that other states should look at as you're trying to encourage employers to become second chance employers. It's not specific to people coming out of the correction system, but to the extent that those that are coming out have addiction struggles that they need help with, it's helpful in that regard. But it is a really, I think, a neat way of looking at the role of employers in the recovery process. And then lastly, I will say that the pandemic has shed some light on our system. And we saw our Chief Justice, and we're going to be doing a webinar discussion with him and a few others on Tuesday afternoon. If anyone's interested, I can share that with you. But we saw our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court issue an order that provided emergency release of several thousand of our pretrial population. And I just want to point this out for those of you that deal with bail reform, and we are dealing with it in Kentucky. We have been unsuccessful in passing bail reform legislation. This is quite the experiment, really, the forced experiment on our pretrial population and what happens. Less than 5%, about 4.6% of those 6,000 or so that were released, reoffended. And I think that that's really important as we go forward in talking about bail reform and essentially our position of getting rid of cash, the cash element of bail reform. Either you're a risk or you're not. If you're not, you're let out, so that it's no longer an issue that someone's inability to pay makes them remain in prison or remain in jail until they're tried. And this is important because we have statistics about the number of days that someone has to sit there. And then sometimes they let that count as their sentence and they're let out. Well, they've already lost their job. They've lost their car. There's been an inability to maybe pay or support their children. And then you've already have found yourself in a hole that's difficult to get out of. So we are going to be looking at how this pandemic has influenced our justice-involved population, whether it's reentry, whether it's pretrial, whether it's the emergency early release of those in the state and county jails, and what changes were put in place that we can make permanent to really move the needle and change the trends that we're seeing in Kentucky on incarceration. Somebody in the chat asked for the bill, the Recovery Through Employment bill. The easiest way to find it, it's Senate Bill 173. It actually passed as Senate Bill 191. I'm Kay Shanks at kychamber.com. If you want to email me, I'll stick that in the chat right now when I'm finished talking. If you want to email me, I'll send you a link to that bill. And it's something really neat you all should really look at if you are in the business of second chance hiring. Again, it's not tied to somebody coming out of the system, but you could do that if that's appropriate in your state. And with that, I'll stop and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us and for all of your insights and for your work. And make sure when you see our common friend Dave Atkinson, to make sure to tell him hi for me. I know he's retired now, but I know he was a big player in the Kentucky Chamber and leading a lot of this work. So make sure to tell him hi for me. All right, next up we have David Velasquez, who is working with the Education Business Coalitions, Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, United LA. And really what we asked David to do is just talk about some other examples that he's been working with across the country of other areas that have done some really great work on this front. So David, thank you for joining us from LA, and we really appreciate your work and for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're running really short on time, so I'll make this quick. So like Jay mentioned, I'm the Director of Education and Business Coalitions, as well as our Smart Justice work here at ACCE. You know, we have a growing number of chambers from across the country that we work with to reduce crime, improve public safety, develop the workforce pipeline, and build thriving and inclusive regional economies. We have some of our champions of our Smart Justice work here on this panel today, but we certainly have you know, a lot more examples from across the country. We have an ongoing, what we call a Smart Justice listserv of over 80 chambers from around the country that we are in constant contact with around their efforts in this space. We also have ACC has a quarterly newsletter. And we also host a quarterly peer-to-peer call, which we consider kind of an open chamber executive platform for folks to exchange their ideas and in this space, in criminal justice reform issues. Just really quickly, some of the other champions that I wanted to highlight, and some of the case studies that we've done here through ACCE are around, for example, are the folks that we work with at the Salt Lake City Chamber, where when their expungement law passed at the state level, the Salt Lake Chamber was exploring ways to broadcast the new law in order to reach individuals who may be affected. So they're doing a lot of work in that space in particular. Also highlighting the LA Area Chamber of Commerce, which is basically has a policy shop that is dedicated exclusively to criminal justice reform issues at the systems level, and working very closely with government institutions to provide similar reentry efforts and internship opportunities to formerly incarcerated youth in particular in that space, and revitalize the economy. Also folks in at the KC Chamber, the Kansas City Chamber, who are developing materials and messaging around second chance hiring to businesses and sharing best practices for second chance hiring. They also continuously convene different parts of the community to convene thousands of folks and businesses in the greater Kansas City area. Also bringing government partners to the table, such as the Department of Corrections, which, as we know, is not likely to have partnered with business before in a lot of these communities. And then finally, the last one I'll mention is one at the Jacksonville Chamber in Florida, which the project Open Door, which promotes hiring practices that give candidates with criminal records a fair chance of employment by delaying background checks until later in the interview process. So those are just some of the major examples that, and some case studies that we've done. There is certainly a lot more that I can mention, and I would be really happy to answer any questions and follow up with folks with more information about the listserv or the calls that we host, especially if we have any other chambers on the line. I'd love to connect with you around these issues in the space. So thank you so much for having us.
David, thanks for your remarks. Thanks for your leadership and sharing all those examples. I think there's definitely a lot for us to learn here in Central Iowa, and sharing those best practices is really what Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives is all about. So appreciate your leadership very, very much. We're now going to hear from Angela Conley. Angela, as many of you know, is a Polk County supervisor. She's also a tri-chair of Capital Crossroads, which is our regional vision plan, and just a tremendous regional leader. And asked her just to kind of give a quick overview of the Polk County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council that looks at a lot of these issues, and maybe give some insights in terms of some advice for us on that front too. So Angela.
Thanks everybody. I've learned a lot just listening to you all, and I can see that we can certainly improve on what we have been doing. But our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council was established in June of 2008, and really it was to review issues similar to what you all have been talking about, and enhance our cooperation and collaboration among all areas of the criminal justice system. So we established this, and basically because when you build a new jail, which we did do, you build it, they will come. And while we still have one whole wing that has not been filled, and I say that because we've been very proud that we haven't filled it, and it's because we have this Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. So I think we use a lot of best practices from around the country. And we have two folks from the Board of Supervisors that sit on it, the Polk County Attorney, the Chief Judge, which is very helpful to sit on our council, the Director of the Department of Corrections, Public Defender, the Sheriff, one of the suburban police chiefs who right now is the chief from Ankeny, Des Moines Police Chief, the Juvenile Court Officer, and our Mental Health Service Director. And we are also asking a couple people, we're having a meeting with Betty Andrews, Isaiah Knox, and Cameron Middlebrook is also hopefully going to be joining our Criminal Coordinating Council. So it's really to identify improvements in the justice system. We've developed system-wide solutions. execute strategies. One of the key elements I think that we put in place was actually having a substance abuse treatment center in the jail, which not too many jails have that, and it's really added and enhanced so many aspects of the system. We've had a risk assessment tool. We've developed, because of the criminal justice system, the Crisis Observation Center is in our community, the Mobile Crisis Response Team, the Crisis Intervention Training Center at all the Law Enforcement Academy has come out because of things that we discussed at the Coordinating Council. And what we did was take a group of people down to San Antonio, Texas, which we modeled a lot of these programs after, called Haven for Hope, which we think is just an outstanding model. And it really does keep people out of jail and back into the community. So the impact and the tax savings is tremendous. And just in 2019 alone, because of the mobile crisis, and I think we saved over $5 million from people not going to jail or not going to the emergency room. Those are true savings. So while we know we still have a lot of work to continue to do with disparities in our jail population, our next meeting is really going to focus on what our legislative agenda will be and some of the other things that we've talked about through our community, the social injustices. So that's just really a snapshot, and because I know there are other people that want to ask questions. So thanks, Jay, for letting me have this opportunity to talk about some of the good things that we're doing here in our community.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks for making time for us. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for that information, and really appreciate all that you and the Board of Supervisors are doing on this front. It's very important work. We're running just a little bit over, but we're going to keep going just for a little bit for a couple of questions. There's at least two so far, and this really, I guess, we'll direct to all of our chamber partners, and I know that in each of your communities, just like here, chambers of commerce and economic development groups work with lots and lots of different partners on the public and private side. And these are big community issues that take lots and lots of different groups working together. And so the one question was, are there examples in any of your communities where you've worked closely with United Ways? Here specifically, we have United Way has an opportunity reentry task force that's been doing some great work. And so what has been your strategies of working with other nonprofits?
I can take that one, Jay. So I mentioned Smart on Crime, and United Way is a part of that group. We also, when the COVID-19 hit, our friends over at the ACLU started an informal work group on reentry services, because we saw thousands of those who had been incarcerated released on kind of an emergency order. Certain folks that were at the end of their term or at the end of their sentence, and they could be released earlier. And so we put together a resource, and it's sort of like the first 90 days. And it may be on our Smart on Crime website already. I'll try to pull that up for a second and share it in the chat box. But we are going to be launching a new website on July 1 related to this, and we're going to be linking to it. And it is critical services that need to be provided to an individual when they're first released from prison or from jail. And so you can imagine it's everything from food to transportation. We are also working on the issue of getting identification cards. I mean, you would think something so simple. It is so complex. So you're out and you want to get a job and you want to get services and you don't have an ID. And where do you go to get an ID, and how do you get it? And we're moving into a real ID situation in Kentucky that makes it even more challenging. So we have this reference document for those they're coming out of the system, but also those who serve them, and it will be updated regularly, and it's on that website. We're also looking at a situation in Kentucky too, and this is more on the pretrial population, where Medicaid benefits are shut off when you are taken into custody. And then when you're released, say on bail, it can take days to get them turned back on. And if you're someone who needs recovery services, that can be a barrier that could result in you choosing to fall back on a substance abuse problem. So we're working on that as well as part of it. And so the United Way has been engaged in a lot of those things. So they're definitely a great partner to have involved. So I would see if you have a Smart on Crime or Smart Justice coalition in your state and reach out to them, because we tend to add folks to our coalition pretty regularly.
Jay, this is Linda. I just want to add too as well, two areas where we partner very closely. One of them a little more unique than the other, but the partner program that we use in our community for employment is through our Goodwill program, and it's called Miami Valley Works, and I'll share a link to that. But they do one-on-one job and skill trainings for folks, and so we'll do that. And then the second one that I want to mention is we actually do a partnership through the law school at our local university to allow people, law students to help in helping fill out the paperwork to get some reduction for them as well. So those two things, they were able to help them fill out paperwork and get their application to get what's called their qualified statement of work. So it was a volunteer effort with some of our local university law students. So just again, some opportunities to partner with unique members of your community is always a very good idea.
All right, thank you for those great examples. And again, I think that there are, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, a number of folks who and organizations who are working on these issues in our region and across the state, and we need to continue to develop those partnerships and work together. So, and I think with Roy's example, he mentioned too that working with a lot of different partners as well. And again, these are big issues that it's going to take a wide coalition of lots of folks. And again, as in my opening remarks, business leaders are going to have to step up and be part of these discussions moving forward with these big issues that we need to work on. So one more quick question was regarding the use of specialty courts in terms of some places have used drug courts and others have used, like in Iowa, have the specialty courts been effective in any of the work that you're doing, mental health courts and things like that?
I'll take that. In Kentucky, we have, of course, diversion programs that are useful for a lot of that, but we also have a new a special interim committee that's been formed to talk about this particular issue. So more to come on that. So again, if you all are interested, email me and I can kind of keep you up to date. It's something, it's not even started to meet. It just sort of exists on a website, but looking at programs for those who struggle with addiction and have found themselves as part of the system because of that. So is there a way to pull out individuals, at least initially, and provide more targeted treatment system instead of expecting, this is what I'm thinking it's going to be about, instead of expecting, our prisons and our jails to provide that treatment, which some do and some don't. So I think it'll be interesting, and it's something that, we'll be a part of and we'll be watching closely. So that's a developing area in Kentucky.
We have run over time, and so I thank everybody for sticking with us. I know that we've included contact information for speakers. If we have additional information, we'll continue to lean on and learn from our friends from across the country as we continue to move forward here in Iowa and here in the DSM USA region. We wanted to flash up Betty's final slide in terms of things that her recommendations in terms of advocating, in terms of way to get more engaged. The partnership is continuing to work on a number of other initiatives as well that we're going to be working on with our regional partners, not only on smart justice reform, but a number of other racial equity strategies, and we're going to need all of your help to continue to move forward. So thanks for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. A really big thank you to our presenters today, Betty Andrews, who I know had to leave and is speaking at another event in Iowa City, Roy Williams, Linda Ashworth, Kate Shanks, David Velasquez, and Angela Conley. Just really appreciate your time and your leadership and your vision. And thanks so much for all you're doing. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you. And I look forward to continuing with our national partners as well. So everybody have a great weekend, and remember to stay DSM strong. And we'll talk to you soon.